Why remember? 100 years ago, the world was engaged in a war on a scale never seen before. This war, the first truly world war, was called the Great War, or the war to end all wars. Sadly, as we know, this wasn't true, and before the war ended, millions of soldiers and civilians had lost their lives. Millions of animals, particularly horses, had died, and towns, villages, and huge areas of land had been destroyed. Just about every family was affected.
We remember the Great War for the examples of perseverance in the harshest conditions. Soldiers in wet, muddy trenches, women working with dangerous chemicals making ammunition, young teenage children working in coal mines to ensure the country had fuel, families existing on a poor diet due to severe food shortages, and many, many families coping with grief and anxiety all day and every day. They carried on because they had to.
It is easy to look back at history and see the war as futile, pointless, and a needless loss of life. But many of those who went off to war believed they were fighting and dying for something real, a cause, a nation, a family. It is thought by many that this terrible loss of life over 4 gruelling years of war should be commemorated and not celebrated. The tragedy of the war and the countless victims claimed by the conflict should not be forgotten. Perhaps the First World War might be best seen as a catalyst in the emergence of modern times. The world we know today and the direction of our own lives have been permanently influenced by the events of World War I and the aftermath, as were the lives of our ancestors, and so we remember. For all the deep suffering, the resilience and the courage that was shown, the values we prize, friendship, loyalty, and the lessons we learned. They changed our nation, and they helped us to make us who we are today.
As many as 250,000 boys under the age of 18 served in the British Army during World War I. Technically, the boys had to be 19 to fight, but the law did not prevent 14-year-olds and upwards from joining in droves. They responded to the Army's desperate need for troops. Recruitment officers were paid 2 shillings and 6 pence for each new Army recruit, and they would often ignore any concerns they had about age. Many people at the start of the 20th century did not have birth certificates, so it was easy to lie about how old you were. The minimum height requirement was 5 foot 3 inches, 1.6 metres, with a minimum chest size of 34 inches. If you met these criteria, you were likely to be recruited. Some young boys were scared of being called a coward and could not resist the pressure from society.
Like all of the teenage officers, Lieutenant John Battersby had responsibilities far beyond his years. As his son Anthony recalls, "There's my dad, 16 years old. Really in the war he is responsible for 30-odd men, and his decisions may result in them dying or not dying. This was it. I am for the front on Tuesday, but if you write and say I am only 17, it will stop me from going. Don't forget." Stephen Brown to his mother, April 1915. He was killed in action at Ypres a month later.
Statistics for the British Empire war effort. Total spend, in today's money, was £145 billion. That's nearly £4,000 per person. 27 million rounds of ammunition were made and used. Nearly 1 million horses involved at the front, and the majority of them died. Enough barbed wire was used to wrap around the coastline of the UK 29 times. 58,000 tonnes of biscuits were sent to the front. 5 out of every 9 soldiers sent to France became a casualty. 888,246 soldiers of the British Empire lost their lives. On the 11th of November, 13-year-old Army cadet Harry Hayes placed the last ceramic poppy in the moat at the Tower of London, each poppy representing a British military death in World War I.
Understandably, not all countries involved in the Great War remember it in the same way. Australians and New Zealanders fought together as the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, or Anzacs. The Anzacs suffered terrible losses during the Gallipoli campaign, which is often considered as marking the birth of national identity in Australia and New Zealand. The date of the Gallipoli landing, the 25th of April, is known as Anzac Day, which is the day that Australians and New Zealanders remember the bravery and the sacrifice of all who served in war for their countries.
100 years on, there are no survivors left of the war that was the biggest conflict in terms of lives lost the world has ever seen. To understand today, we need to remember yesterday. If we remember yesterday, we can help make the future a better place for all.
Austria and Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia was their friend, so they defended her. Germany stepped up and sent troops to war. France joined in and demanded more. Britain, friends with France, decided to take action. Bound by a treaty, Britain had to take direction. 3 years later, America joined in too. So many countries, the war grew and grew. It was called the Great War, or the world at war. So many lost their lives. What was it all for? Anger and loss? Tears and pain? Did it resolve things? All for what gain? Sad times, the world in divide. What was it all for? What did they decide?